In part one, I explained how we got here. Rising debt levels, a jammed up housing ladder, skewed ownership demographics, structural problems with the way our housing systems were built. In part two, I walked you through what's happening now, from vendor take-back mortgages, tightening of lending criteria by banks, and foreclosures. Today, with the final part three of our housing series, I'm going to be talking about what comes next, who's left to buy, what inventory we will actually need, and whether we're truly millions of homes short or just trapped in a policy loop that keeps inflating demand to avoid addressing supply and affordability head on. So let's start with the basics. I am not here to predict the total collapse of Canadian housing. This isn't a doomer forecast. This is just math. Population size, ownership rates, and the shifting balance between supply and demand. So I am also not housing Nostradamus or Canadian economic Nostradamus, nor do I proclaim to be. Let's keep that in mind from the get-go. So as of 2023, seniors 65 and older made up 19% of Canada's population. And that number is going to continue to grow for at least another decade, as Gen X is now just moving into their senior years. Boomers are between 46 and 64, and they are the largest group of homeowners. Now, they're the largest group of homeowners partially because until millennials, they were by and far the largest population demographic. So it isn't that they own more homes than everybody, it's that they were, in fact, a massive chunk of the population. So Gen X is 65 to 80, and about 70% of them are homeowners. Sorry, I should say seniors, they are 71% of them are homeowners. So 65 is now 60 this year, 80 is 45. They're only going to continue to age, and with that comes the housing things that we will get on to. Millennials are 81 to 96, and they sit at 56% of home ownership. So part of that, I mean, we always hear about millennials not having homes, but some of us are in our mid-40s or almost mid-40s. We're 44 at the top end this year. So there's a big shift and difference in dynamic in that one generation alone that we haven't seen before in Gen X or in the boomer generation. And we'll get into why further on. And Gen Z is 97 to 2012. They virtually own nothing, 2.6% of Canadian homes. But the thing is that my 13-year-old is a Gen Z. We have some years to catch up there to the other echelons. So keep all of this in mind as we move forward. So according to StatsCan and CMHC data, seniors alone own 6.6 million homes. Gen Z and millennials combined own 5.7 million homes. And again, most of Gen Z is not even thinking about buying a home right now. So this is where the real math kicks in. You'll often hear that we need millions more homes to fix Canada's housing crises. But do we really? If we assume that Gen Z and millennials will eventually match boomer ownership rates, which is a generous assumption, we are only short by about 900,000 homes, units, whatever you want to refer to them as. Because we already own 5.7 million and boomers own 6.6 million, meaning that in theory, generational turnover already covers the future housing needs of Gen Z, and Gen X therefore then covers Gen Alpha. So we don't need to build endlessly if we're accounting for the next 10 to 15 years of senior downsizing and end-of-life turnover that's about to begin. But here's the twist. That only works if governments stop juicing demand. and if Gen Z can afford to buy the homes that boomers are vacating, which right now they can't. So let's be honest, we cannot expect Gen Z to buy homes at the same age that their parents did. And there's a good reason for that. Tuition. Now, back in my day, and again, I am a geriatric millennial, but back in my day, you did not need a 4-year degree to get an entry-level executive assistant job. You did not need a master's degree to get an entry-level manager's job. We somehow, in the middle of my generation, changed the entire educational makeup. And with that, tuitions went up. Back in my day, you used to be able to pay for tuition with a little bit of OSAP, a summer job, and a part-time job during school. That is not possible anymore for the majority of Canadian students. So we cannot expect, we cannot expect a 25-year-old to be graduating with a bachelor's degree and buying a home, because there's no job for them. There's no job for them. And starting work at 18 and then saving up and buying a home at 25, as the boomers did and some Gen X did, that is also no longer possible because those jobs don't exist. So we have to change how we look at when we expect Gen Z to be buying homes. Is 24 to 25, as boomers did, realistic today? And it isn't. And it isn't just housing prices that make that unrealistic. It's what we've done with education and how every job now needs a 4-year or more degree. We've sort of stacked the system against them from the get-go and told them they're behind before they're even out of the gate. No wonder some of them are so pissed. We also really have to factor in immigration, not in a culture war sense, but from a policy and supply angle. Over 73% of immigrants to Canada in the last 5 years have been Gen Z, arriving into a rental or entry-level buyer segment that's already under pressure. And remember, our Gen Z stats of how many own homes and how many need homes include all of those immigrants who may be in Canada on a learner's visa, education visa. I don't know what it's called. I'm sorry. They could be there on work permits. They may not be PRs. They may not have the intention of staying, but they are included in our calculations as to how many homes and units we need. So the government says immigration isn't driving up housing prices, but it's actually reshaped demand and policy, skewing CMHC projections, provincial planning models, and even investor strategies, because we have no idea how many of those Gen Z buyers, potential buyers in the future, are actually going to still be in Canada in the future. And that matters, because we're not just building homes, we're building for a specific age, income, and life stage. And if policy keeps relying on high immigration to inflate GDP and construction demand, we may actually never hit a true supply-demand balance. So even as we stand today with immigration at the levels that it has been, which should not continue, but at the levels that it has been, we still have an oversupply of boomer homes. Basic math. But now we want to build more. Will we be able to? Or is that part of the issue? And is that part of why these homes never get built out of these platforms? So where does that leave us? Are we really millions of units short? Or have we simply reshaped society so drastically that expectations haven't caught up to reality? If we build too much without addressing the core affordability issues, prices are going to drop. Not because houses have gotten cheaper to build, but because demand will eventually stall out. On the flip side, If we keep pumping immigration, extending credit, and subsidizing home ownership while holding rates artificially low, we risk inflating the system into a structural failure and not just a market correction. The housing system as it stands is a house of cards. If politicians were to let this collapse, we would hit that reset point those Gen Zs keep asking for. But that is not going to happen. Residential real estate is one of Canada's largest industries. That bubble is never going to be allowed to burst. So what does this all mean? It means that based on current age demographics, turnover rates, we already have enough homes in the pipeline to meet the future needs of Gen Z and millennials. The problem isn't the number of units, it's who owns them, who can afford to buy them, and whether we're willing to let the natural turnover of redistribution of supply happen. If we keep layering policy band-aids over a system that desperately needs a reset, I don't know quite what the future holds. That is the ever so light ending to our 3-part housing series. I really hope that you enjoy it. And next Friday, a new 3-part series is going to start that will be focused on Canada's rental crises. Who's renting, where rents are rising the fastest, what policies are helping or hurting, and what it really means financially to be a renter. Thanks for watching. Have a wonderful weekend. And if you're new here, welcome. Have a wonderful day.